A few years ago, after a stern talking to by my dermatologist, I set out on a quest to find the perfect daily sunscreen. I'd been wearing sunscreen faithfully on my face every day since college, but only SPF 30. My doctor said it had to be at least 60 or above. For my face, it also needed to be lightweight because my skin tends toward oily, and I didn't want to feel like I was wearing a gross, heavy mask. After some trial and error, I found it. Over the years, I've used a number of Neutrogena products and have come to love and trust the brand and their products. But I'm breaking up with Neutrogena and embarking on a new quest for a new sunscreen, which I will tell you more about later. We don't read the minor prophets like Amos much. Around here, we're probably most familiar with something like Amos 5:24, which says, "But let justice roll down like water and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream." It's a beautiful image for justice and righteousness. Only water rolling down can actually be quite terrifying, which fits the fiery disposition of the prophet. His call for justice isn't for a pleasantly babbling brook alongside which one might enjoy a relaxing afternoon. He's calling for a justice that will sweep away violence and the violence of injustice and oppression. So who is this guy, anyway? The opening words of the book introduce the prophet, Amos from Tekoa, south of Jerusalem, in Judah. The text says he was among the shepherds. The only other occurrence of this word is in 2 Kings 3:4, where it is translated as sheep breeder, probably meaning something like a rancher overseeing other shepherds on a large operation. So, a prominent man from Judah, the southern kingdom, who finds himself denouncing the deep web of social injustice upon which the prosperous society of the northern kingdom of ancient Israel is built. It seems that the period of prophetic activity for Amos was actually a relatively short window, maybe only a year around 760 BCE. Scholars arrive at this date because of a reference to the known dates of the reigns of Judean and Israelite kings, as well as reference to an earthquake, which was severe enough to leave archaeological evidence. So the first half of the 8th century BCE was a time of imperial expansion and growing economic disparity between the wealthy and the poor. We're not talking about just well-off people here, but those who led indolent and indulgent lives at the gross expense of the poor, all the while behaving smugly pious. Thus, the religious festivals of this time flourished. These same people, the prophet says in chapter 2, sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They who trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth. Our reading today opens with the vision of a basket of summer fruit. I don't know about you, but for me, this is an image that evokes blessing, abundance, and delight. The Hebrew word for summer fruit here is kayetz. But any in Amos's audience who vainly thought they deserve such rich rewards would have been immediately shut down with the Lord's pronouncement that it is actually the end, the ketz in Hebrew, that has come. It's a starkly contrasting wordplay between a beautiful image of abundance, which has undoubtedly come at the cost of the trampling of the poor, and the Lord's indictment of the nation. You think what you see looks like prosperity and abundance, but really it signals a big problem, and Amos is sounding the alarm. What ensues is a list of economic practices that include cheating, stealing, slavery, and indentured servitude. Listen again to verses 4 through 6. Hear this, you who trample on the needy and bring ruin to the poor of the land, saying, when will the new moon be over so that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath so that we may offer wheat for sale? We will make the ephah smaller and the shekel heavier and practice deceit with false balances, buying the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of sandal, and selling the sweepings of the wheat. Despite their pretensions, they can't wait for religious festivals like the new moon and the Sabbath to be over so that they can get back to their insidious business practices. They falsify weights and measures in the marketplace and sell what might be left as gleanings for the poorest of the poor to gather. Buying a person for a pair of sandals. This is a horrific scene. I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that most of us are not in any position to exercise such shady business practices as these. So when we read in Amos about the oppression and serious abuse of the poor, how are we to understand which actions to take in our own time? Several weeks ago, as I was preparing for my sermon on 1 Kings 19, where Elijah flees the wrath of Jezebel and encounters the presence of God hundreds of miles away on Mount Horeb, I came across this quote from Walter Brueggemann. What we have to do in the church is to educate the church that we are not really in the charity business, we are in the justice business. What? This was shocking to me. Not in the charity business? And then I read this in Richard Rohr's new book, The Tears of Things. The church has been trying for centuries to save individuals while ignoring the corrupt system in which those individuals operate. God, by definition, deals with the whole, but our egos keep us lost in the small parts that we think we can control. Jesus says, when you give alms, implying that this is an expected practice. So that would seem that charity is a good and right thing. However, it also seems that we can't think it will solve a systemic problem. It might provide temporary relief to someone in poverty. It might keep someone from slipping into poverty who is only having a temporary crisis. But justice work requires going upstream to the source of the problem, which seems to always be greed and hoarding of wealth and other resources in the hands of a few at the expense of the many. We talk about standing in solidarity with those who are being victimized, but beyond charity, I wonder what this could look like. How do we show up in solidarity with the poor? Not just with occasional one-off actions, but with our commitments and our lifestyles. Most of us probably don't have much occasion to trample the poor in our daily lives. And many of us have spent our lives trying to live out the Mennonite virtue of simple living. But what if, at this moment, the virtue is to think about where we can pay more, not less? What if we start questioning where our good deal or those bargain basement prices are coming from and how they're even possible? What if we look at our lives and think about not just where to save a buck, but remember those old practices of borrowing, trading, and repurposing? And where we do need to make purchases, let's invest ourselves in investigating brands and their parent companies. What kinds of labor practices do they employ? Do they rely on child labor? Sweatshops in general? Do they fund military operations around the world? One place to start could be to look for the fair trade symbol. Maybe start with something like coffee. That's where I started a long time ago after seeing the documentary Black Gold. Then how about chocolate, clothing, shopping at the farmer's market whenever possible, supporting artisans and makers directly whenever possible, eschewing one-use disposable items. Our world is so ensnared in policies, goods, and corporations that trample the poor. It seems nearly impossible not to be complicit in some way. I don't want anyone to become paralyzed here with despair, but I do want us to look at our lives and start making changes. It's not going to happen overnight, but we can decide to pay attention. We can decide to ask questions about why are things so cheap? And we can decide to pay more to support fair and just practices wherever we possibly can. I think this is what it really could mean to stand in solidarity with the poor and those who are trampled by unjust systems. If we're just engaging in occasional one-off actions that don't actually impact our lives or change the way we live, what use is that to us? What use is that beyond patting ourselves beyond the... Let me just start that whole sentence over. If we're just occasionally engaging in one-off actions that don't impact our lives or change the way we live, what use is that beyond patting ourselves on the back? I told you I would come back to my favorite Neutrogena sunscreen. I recently found the brand on a boycott list in support of Palestine. The list identifies brands like L'Oreal, the parent company of Neutrogena, which support Israel, quote, through their business practices, charitable contributions, or other partnerships, end quote. This is just one brand in our household. And this is just one area of justice requiring attention in the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people and the rampant human rights violations. We say reconciliation is the center of our work. In this area of how our lifestyles trample the poor through abusive economic practices, the reconciliation needs to be a realignment of the ways in which our money and our spending contributes to injustice and oppression of others. If the church needs to focus more on dismantling systems of injustice, what does that look like? I think, like the Martha and Mary story, there could probably be more than one good and right answer. Let's hold up these questions in the light of God's love for us to collectively pray about and dream about and experiment with together. Let's live these questions well, as the poet Rilke says, hoping that one day we will find ourselves living into the answer. May it be so. Amen.